Welcome back to today's video. Today is Sunday, September 29th, 2024, and today we are going to be talking about Senator Jeff Flake from the state of Arizona, the last Republican senator from this state, now endorsing Vice President Kamala Harris to be the next president of the United States of America. Senator Jeff Flake's decision to endorse Kamala Harris comes at a time where the polling is showing Arizona has become an increasingly more positive race for the former president, as the data shows a slight uptick in support from the moments around Kamala Harris's announcement of Tim Walz as vice president at the Democratic National Convention. Around the time of mid-August, Donald Trump maintained his lead, but was overcome by Vice President Harris by 0.2% in August 17th, 2024, which was roughly the last time that Vice President Harris maintained a lead in the state of Arizona. And since then, Donald Trump has expanded his lead tenfold, from 0.2% to 2 points statewide. And overall, Donald Trump has seen a slight uptick across a number of other battleground states, like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina, and Georgia, all at a time, too, where largely speaking, the Democratic campaign is looking for a coordinated effort to really solidify and lock down this election, and of course, a number of battleground Senate seats and House seats across the board. So this endorsement also, too, is one that honestly is quite important in the state of Arizona. Jeff Flake, as the most recently elected Republican to the United States Senate, not recently elected, actually recently served Republican, he endorsing Kamala Harris is something that is pretty substantive. It's something that I think also, too, really marks this moment about Arizona, where we recently saw one of the Republican mayors from a border city, endorse Kamala Harris as well, the Republican mayor of Mesa, Arizona, who actually spoke at an Arizona rally that took place just around a month ago. This is, again, a number of different factors have come into play with people like Representative Liz Cheney and former Republican Vice President Dick Cheney, who have come out and endorsed Kamala Harris for president of the United States. Many of these Republicans who back in 2020 endorsed Donald Trump, many of these Republicans who in previous elections were all in on GOP tickets. So Jeff Flake isn't necessarily new to the Democratic coalition. He endorsed Biden back in 2020. But again, the timing of endorsements is honestly quite critical. Remember, Taylor Swift endorsed Biden back in 2020, way earlier on than she did for Kamala Harris this time around, right on the day of the presidential debate. This endorsement is definitely coming at a time where Democrats are realizing, we need more effort and resources into the state of Arizona, and I'm sure Jeff Flake sees that as well. And the reason why I think this is something that does in fact resonate is because I remember how close the state of Arizona was in the 2020 election. Fox News was the only network to call it on election night, and many people look at that as a mistake because they called it at a time where Joe Biden had an 8-point advantage with roughly 75% of precincts reporting, mostly from the one county that gave Joe Biden a victory, and so everybody assumed that, there was no way Donald Trump was going to come back. But he still came within 0.3% of winning the state of Arizona. It was certainly a very competitive state. And it swung by roughly 4 or 5 points from the 2016 election, and so every single vote absolutely mattered, right? You're talking over 3 million cast across the state, and the decisive margin for Joe Biden was just 11,000 votes across this state, with 11 electoral votes that genuinely could make a major difference in the outcome of this election, depending on how some of these battleground states go. And Arizona ultimately going to Joe Biden was, again, a realignment of Democratic politics and where they can reach in the day and age of Donald Trump's Republican Party. And a large reason I think, too, the Democrats won was because of this coalition that had been pushing against Trump since the 2016 election. When Donald Trump won the state of Arizona in 2016, he only won the state by 3.5%. Now, to his credit, we saw that overall, the Libertarian Party candidates here, Green Party candidates, combined vote share across third parties in the state of Arizona, Gary Johnson, Jill Stein, was roughly 5 points, and many Republicans said the Libertarian vote was what pulled away from Donald Trump, not anything else. It wasn't that Donald Trump was unelectable. It wasn't that Donald Trump wasn't the right candidate. It was simply because the Libertarian vote existed in a way it did not exist in 2012, when we saw the same candidate, Gary Johnson, only win 1.4% of the vote in 2012 in the state of Arizona. And honestly, we knew that that wasn't the case, but they were pointing to that Obama figure. The Obama figure that Obama was at 45% across the state when Hillary Clinton was at roughly the same. And so no substantive improvement for Democratic Party vote share, but a massive reduction for that, again, of the Republican ticket under Donald Trump. Romney plus 9 reduced to Trump plus 3.5. But then fast forward to 2020, when we saw that when you take away major third-party presence, Joe Biden won the state. Democrats did better. They improved off their 2016 and 2012 margin vote shares. And Donald Trump saw a reduction from both Mitt Romney, even though he saw a slight uptick from his performance in 2016 and George W. Bush, the two Republicans that, and of course John McCain, who was from that home state, so I take him out of the equation there just slightly, but still, Donald Trump severely underperformed many other Republicans in the past. And that's a big reason why Joe Biden was able to win this state, but it wasn't without a diverse coalition of support coming from Republicans across the state that did a very similar thing in that election that they're doing in this election, and that was endorsing the Democratic opponent. Cindy McCain announced that she was endorsing Joe Biden for president. Now, keep in mind how recent the 2008 election had been at this point, right? We were talking about Cindy McCain largely because this was an election that was just 12 years after the election where John McCain and Sarah Palin ran on a ticket against Barack Obama and Joe Biden. Right, we are all very reminiscent, I think, if you were alive during the 2008 election, if you were closely watching it, how different politics felt then. McCain and Biden, or McCain and Obama really, but the Obama-Biden campaign, McCain-Palin, were the opposite ends of the spectrum, and now it feels like the spectrum has expanded more so in one direction than the other, and what that has resulted in is people like Cindy McCain feeling more gravitated towards the center and more willing to endorse a Democrat here. Because the line of messaging has been from Liz Cheney, from Dick Cheney. And Liz Cheney was all in for Trump back in 2020. She's not one of those people who endorsed Biden in 2020, which again is definitely something that we find for many Republicans who are both, Trump in 2016, Biden 2020, Harris 2024. Liz Cheney was not one of those people. She was Trump 2016, Trump 2020. You can see a lot of her campaigning that she did for Trump in 2020, the videos she made, the tweets she did, because it was January 6th that turned many of these Republicans. But again, to that point, Cindy McCain was very similar in this line of thinking that Liz Cheney has pushed to say it's one thing to be anti-Trump and to write in Ronald Reagan on the ballot. It's another thing to actually use that anti-Trump messaging and use that anti-Trump sentiment to make an impact. And that's by voting for Kamala Harris. And so Cindy McCain endorsing Joe Biden also did a number on the Republican ticket in the state of Arizona. The McCain family is admired and appreciated primarily amongst independents in the state of Arizona. Republicans have sort of soured on John McCain. They've soured on the McCain family at large. But what we know about him, honestly, a very, very commendable history. But when you take a look, a commendable history in terms of electoral track record, he is very strong in the state of Arizona. I mean, you can take a look at it and say, no matter what you feel or like about him, he knows how to win elections in Arizona. And he actually ran alongside the same ballot as Donald Trump in 2016 when we saw Arizona go from being a state that Trump won by 3.5. In the Senate race, John McCain won by 13%. So again, grounding us in understanding John McCain was a very stellar candidate. Why? Because so many Republicans and independents really appreciated him, and arguably even Democrats as a candidate, as a veteran, whatever it might be, and they wanted him in the U.S. Senate, and he knew how to win over voters. And so when Donald Trump went after John McCain in 2016, and then Donald Trump continued those attacks, it resulted in endorsements like this. It results in endorsements like this, where John McCain's son now endorses Kamala Harris and announces not only is he endorsing Kamala Harris, but again, going down that same line of becoming a registered Democrat for the first time in his life. The McCain family, full of Republicans, their father, Republican nominee for president in 2008, endorsing Kamala Harris and switching party registration. That is substantive, and that matters a lot in a state like Arizona, where the margins really do come down to the wire. Because I can imagine it going something like this, similar to 2020, where there are enough Republican voters out there that were McCain, Bush twice, Romney, Trump, because they wanted to be maybe there, Trump in 2016, then in 2020 went to Biden. In 2024, they weren't sure entirely, didn't feel like the stakes were as tied to COVID or as high stakes, or they may not even been as excited or inspired to vote for someone like Kamala Harris, right? The enthusiasm there for Democrats is really high, but amongst Republicans and independents, it's not nearly as high, obviously. I mean, that makes sense. Regardless, though, they're in that boat, and they're saying, okay, I don't want Donald Trump to be president, but I don't know if I'm all in on Kamala Harris like I was all in on Joe Biden. Or not even necessarily all in, but I was more inclined to vote for Biden. I know his track record of bipartisanship. I know his track record of working alongside Republicans. I know his track record as vice president. I don't know much about Vice President Harris. And to many Republicans across this nation who are on that point, they may be inclined to vote for Trump, but they also may be inclined to not vote at all or vote for a Democratic ticket. And what this endorsement does, and what endorsements like these do, and did in 2020, is shift those people who are just on the fence, those maybe 10, 20, 30,000 people who fit this characterization, fit this type of person, and are now saying, okay, the stakes of this election actually are that important. Important enough that John McCain's son is endorsing Kamala Harris explicitly. Important enough that the Republican senator that I voted for back in 2012 is now endorsing Kamala Harris. This alignment to being a big tent party that includes both AOC and Dick Cheney is something that does, in fact, shift over some voters who might otherwise say, I'm sitting out of this race. And Republicans, too, in Arizona, again, really do shift away from the present-day Arizona GOP. The party of John McCain in 2008 is not the party that Arizona Republicans represent today. Why? Because of Donald Trump. Despite his loss in the state in 2020, Republicans up across the ballot in Arizona have really tried to replicate him. Take a look at any of the statewide races in 2022. They were Donald Trump figures. You saw Kari Lake in the governor's election, right? You saw Abe Hamadeh in the attorney general's race. You saw Blake Masters in the Senate race. You saw so many of these people who, again, tried to replicate the former president because they thought that was the pathway to victory, because they couldn't look past the fact that 2016 was actually a 6-point shift to the left, not a victory for the right. And so Jeff Flake, too, as someone who announced his retirement in 2017, went after Trump in 2017, said, you know what, you're not the right guy for this. He endorsed Biden in 2020. Now he's all in for Harris in 2024. And again, it comes at a time where Republicans across the country that have been in this, joint effort, some Republicans, again, less than 10%, but some Republicans who are in this joint effort to elect Kamala Harris to the presidency are starting to speak up not necessarily just against Trump, but for Kamala Harris. Again, to that point that Liz Cheney has made multiple times, it is one thing to write in somebody and actively vote against Trump, but not for the Democratic ticket. It is another thing to actually vote for that Democratic ticket. So the actual person who does have the highest chance of victory is a Democratic nominee for president. And so when we take a look at what's happening in the state of Arizona, and it isn't just there too, right? You're seeing that the Mesa mayor, John Giles, endorsed Kamala Harris. That matters. This is something that I think we have come to see is becoming a more common trend line among some Republicans who were a bit on the fence after 2020 and the January 6th insurrection that are now coming into 2024 with a rewound vision that now it's time to endorse a Democrat for the first time in their political careers. And Republicans across the state and across the country have also been pretty supportive of Vice President Harris. You can take a look. There are representatives, there are governors, there are many members, former RNC chair people, right? You are talking about people who served and represented the National Republican Party that are now endorsing Kamala Harris. These are things that should and cannot be ignored. When the margins come down to the narrowest of narrow, you can see that it does, in fact, make an impact. And every piece of the puzzle that lands Kamala Harris to the presidency is something that we can look back on and say that was crucial, because clearly all of it was, and at the same time recognize that it's moments like these that do, in fact, fit those pieces of the puzzle. Now this is one more piece. Now this is one more piece. Now it's starting to come together. It takes a perfect storm of a strong, energized Democratic base. It takes a perfect storm of a strong, energized independent base. It takes disgruntled Republicans who are unwilling to back their party nominee to vote for the Democratic ticket. It takes circumstances like the abortion referendum that's now certified to be on the November ballot to take place. So voters not only inspired by the presidential ticket, but also their reproductive freedoms. It's a number of different pieces here. And now with the endorsement of Senator Jeff Flake, Republicans in Arizona have another reason to jump on board with Kamala Harris if they were already against Donald Trump in the first place. And that's why you might start to see some of these things happen. In that vision and idea of country over party, there are many Republicans out there that have now come out in full support of the Democrats, despite maybe not doing so for Biden back in 2020. Jeff Flake, not exactly that case, but also is in a position where we're looking at the 2024 election at large, and we're looking at this very, very broad strokes understanding of how Republicans, in even minute ways, make an impact in this race, and it is endorsements like these that do, in fact, sway some voters. And so when it comes down to the Electoral College map, here's what we're looking at math-wise. Arizona is 11 electoral votes. Kamala Harris can't win Arizona and win the election on her own. But in winning Arizona, it will likely speak to the electability of Kamala Harris in other surrounding battleground states like Nevada and Colorado and New Mexico and Texas. She'd likely win Nevada in conjunction with Arizona, and she'd likely, too, win the Rust Belt region if she was winning in Arizona as well as Nevada. But it also leaves room for failure. It leaves room for states like Wisconsin to vote for Donald Trump. It leaves room for states like North Carolina to vote for Donald Trump. It leaves room for states like Georgia to vote for Donald Trump. Because even with Wisconsin, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Texas, and Maine's 2nd Congressional District, you could even give Donald Trump Nevada, which wouldn't happen if Kamala Harris is winning Arizona, but you could even give Donald Trump Nevada. Kamala Harris still wins the presidency. With a combination of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Arizona, less than half of the swing states the Democratic nominee is contesting in this election, she still wins the election. And that's why Arizona can and likely will make all the difference in this election cycle. And endorsements like this only stand to benefit Vice President Kamala Harris by getting those voters out in Maricopa County, where 67% of the state resides, getting out those voters in surrounding and outskirts counties that might be more inclined to vote for Kamala Harris if there were other Republicans doing so as well. We're seeing it in Mesa. We're seeing it now across the state. Republicans in Arizona, some of them, including members of the McCain family, are all in for Vice President Kamala Harris. And that makes an improvement number. That makes a difference in an election that is so close, just like the 2020 presidential. And it'll be very fascinating to watch what this final margin ends up being, because endorsements like these, again, can make all the difference when races are just so close. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the top left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2024 presidential election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.